afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Mulo, a consultant with Africa No Filter, and I would like to welcome you to this webinar on grant writing for creative professionals. It's a great pleasure to have all of you join us from different parts of the continent, and we hope that the next 2 hours will be an interactive learning session that you can all learn about, as creatives, how to write grants, because as you all know, one of the challenges that many creatives have is getting access to funding that will enable them to do their work. And then finally, please engage us on social media using hashtag ANF Masterclass and tag us on at Africa No Filter. We'd love to hear from you regarding your feedback on this session. So again, welcome so much. We have the whole ANF team is here, and I would love to ask our Executive Director, Moki Makura, to just give you a brief welcome and talk a little bit about who ANF is and what we do. Over to you, Moki.
Thank you, Paul. And hello, everybody. It's very exciting to see people from South Africa, from Botswana, Nigeria, Malawi. There's a lot of Kenyans. But anyway, great to have you on board. And I want to thank Paul and Anthony for hosting this session. And this session and other sessions like this, which we'll be doing, are in response to what we have been asking you about what sort of sessions you want. And just to tell you a little bit about Africa No Filter and why we do this. Africa No Filter is an organization, a not-for-profit, that was set up to try and, I guess, fight against some of the stereotypical narratives about Africa and within Africa. And the way we do that is really through kind of three big pillars. One is through research, because we want to be an evidence-based, data-driven organization, and we've got a number of interesting programs there. A big piece of it is through grant making. So this particular session is very relevant, and we've got Jessica on our team who's going to talk you through the kind of grants we do, which are primarily to people in the arts and culture space and to media. And the third thing that we do is really through disruption. How do we disrupt existing narratives and disrupt the institutions and the systems that are in place that enable these negative narratives? So there's a number of programs that we have, and those we tend to do in-house. Things like we are developing a new story agency. We're thinking of doing a global media index to rank how international media cover Africa. If you have a moment, go onto our website. There's a lot about what we do, read some of our reports, and just get engaged. We are essentially trying to build a community of artists, of storytellers, of journalists, of bloggers, of content creators, of writers, of filmmakers who care about narrative, who care about how your country, your community, your continent is shown. And that's kind of what we are trying to do. So I'll stop there and I will hand back to Paul, but it's great to have you on board and very excited by this session. Paul, back to you.
Thank you so much, Moki. And I see the numbers are increasing. We now have about 208, and this keeps going up. So we're really very happy on the turnout. And the goal today is really to spend the next 2 hours to look at grant writing. And I'm going to handle the first hour and try to have what I hope, an interactive discussion. It can't really be too interactive because of the format that we're in, but it's really to walk you guys through some of the things that you as creative professionals need to think about as you start looking for funds. So I'm going to start by looking at what a grant is. Many people see grants as, let me start by saying grants are not loans. Grants are very unique in that an organization gives you money or resources to be able to do a project that that organization finds very useful. So they are non-repayable funds. You don't repay grants. I guess you repay grants by doing the project that you are being funded to do. That's how you repay your grant. So it's a non-repayable fund given to one party by one party, which is a grant maker. That grant maker can be a government department, it can be a corporation, it can be a foundation or trust, and then it's given to a recipient, which are the grant seekers. Recipients can be individuals, they can be corporations, they can be organizations. Most of us do fund non-profit organizations. They can also be educational institutions. And the whole idea behind the grant is, again, for specific purposes. There are different types of grant support that organizations get. And I'm going to quickly go through some of this. You can get what is called an operating grant, which is really a general or unrestricted support. It will give operating grants that enable organizations to stay open. You know, one of the challenges that many organizations have is that when they get grants, the grants are so tied into specific activities that the resources they need to pay light bills, to pay rent, to do the things it takes to stay open to do those activities are normally not there. So operating grants are really not tied into any particular project, but enable you to be able to stay open and continue doing the work. So we have a program support, then we have a capacity building, which is what a lot of creatives are often interested in, capacity building. These are those grants that are given. It can be part of a fellowship or a scholarship or something that enables you to be able to build your capacity in a particular area. You can have a capital or equipment support, which again are the resources that enable you to buy some equipment that you would need to do your projects. Capital equipment support are often very difficult grants to make because you, the grant recipient, has to actually expense out the capital support that you receive. So when the equipment you buy has to be depreciated over a certain period of time. So many foundations might not want to do capital support. You have your planning or research support, which can be a pre-production grant for filmmakers. Again, these are the grants that enable you to be able to do the research that goes into your projects. And finally, you have awards, fellowships, and residencies. Most of these are grants that go to individuals. And again, these are not really tied into specific areas. An award can be an appreciation grant. A fellowship is as you know, ANF has a lot of fellowships that we support. And you also have residencies that allow you as a creative professional to spend some time somewhere else, really focusing your energy and your work on your creative activities. Next slide, please. So some certain questions that you need to always think of before you approach your grant seeking activities. First of all, as an organization, you need to understand your mission and your vision. I know most of us creative professionals don't really think about the importance of our mission and our vision, but it's good for you to think about it and understand it, because you need to make sure that when you go out to look for a grant, your mission and your vision align with the organization that you are trying to seek for funding from. You don't just go and blindly seek for funding. You need to make sure you seek for funding that aligns with the work that you're doing and the work that you want to do. You need to understand your organization's budget. And this is very important because when it comes to grant seeking, budget is something that many people look at. If you are a small organization that has an annual operating budget of, let's say, $25,000 per annum, and then you come and apply for a grant of $200,000, I cannot justify giving that grant to you because you have not seen that kind of money in your operation. So you always do a grant that fits within the budget of what you have done, because it lets the grant maker know that you can be able to handle the resources that you get. You need to ask yourself, what programs do you offer? I think we went back, okay, what programs do you offer? Again, this is important because you don't want to collect a grant for a project that you cannot deliver on. So by understanding the projects you offer and the programs you offer, you understand what you can be able to deliver on. Next, who are your target beneficiaries? Are those beneficiaries in alignment with who the funder is trying to reach. If you look at ANF, for example, ANF has a target of reaching young African creatives. So if you're coming to ANF to seek for fund and that aligns with your target beneficiaries, then it plays an advantage. What is your goal for the funding? What are you going to use the funding for? It's always very good to be very specific when you're asking a funder for money, because funders don't just give away money. They want to know that it's tied to a particular project and that you have thought about that project and have a goal of how you're going to be able to use that money. Why do you think the fund you're applying for is a good fit for you? You know, what have you done already that fits into what you're proposing? If you haven't done, let's say you are a production company that hasn't done a feature film, you've done short films, and all of a sudden you're coming to ask for funds to do a feature film. It's not going to be an easy sell because you haven't had that experience. It's not a good fit for the kind of work that you do. Are you exploring other sources of funding besides grants? Again, most of the time, grants alone cannot support your project because, you know, a lot of you know that if you ask many grant-making organizations for $50,000, you'll probably come back and say, okay, we can give you 25. So we need to also make sure that you have thought about alternative ways that you can get resources to conclude those projects. And then are you trying to maintain funding for an existing project, or are you pursuing new funders for a new project? A lot of times, if you've started a project already and have invested a lot in it, it's a lot easier to get what we call finishing grants than when you are about to start something new. Funders always feel comfortable and confident in this, especially if you're a new organization, in supporting work that you've already started, because we know there is already momentum going into that project. Next slide, please. Okay, so other questions: do you have solid systems in place? Grant makers want to put their resources where they know that systems are in place. Systems like an accounting system, an IT system. I mean, if you get money, how are you going to expense out that money? How are you going to be able to report to us? We go to as far as looking at systems that you have around workplace policy. When I was working with the Ford Foundation, one of the things we did for many people that we gave grants to was to make sure that they are contributing to the national pension scheme for their workers. That's a system in place. Because if you're not doing that, if you don't have those structures in place, then how do we trust you that you're going to be able to use that money appropriately? Do you have the skills needed to complete the project? Again, make sure that your skills that you have in-house align with the project that you're proposing. Funders do not like you using a lot of the money to go and hire consultants. We want you to make sure that you have these skills in-house, so the money goes towards executing the project and not paying for outside help to come and help you do the project. Next, is the organization's leadership willing to do what it takes to meet the requirements that come with receiving grant funding? When you go and ask for grant funding, you will be asked to provide a lot of information. You'll be asked to provide audited reports. You'll be asked to provide who are your board members. So really the group funding you wants to know as much as possible about the organization. So you need to make sure that you are willing to provide all that information they need, because that will enable them to do adequate due diligence and make sure that the investments they're making is something that's worthwhile. And then what are your challenges and successes as an organization? As you write your proposal to a funder, remember the funder doesn't know you. So you need to be able to let them know that you're human, and part of being human is to have challenges and successes. So really talk about these issues in your proposal, articulate all of these issues. What have you done well? What have you struggled with? And what are you trying to fix with the work that you do? Next slide, please. Okay, so source of grant funds. We have grant funds can come from governments. We have a lot of government agencies that provide grant funds. We have foundations and other nonprofits. when we think of grants, we always think about foundations, but they are not the only groups that give us funds. But foundations contribute a lot to the grant making landscape. And then other non-profits like ANF is a non-profit, and you have other organizations similar to that. Then you have for-profit organizations as part of their corporate social responsibility. Many organizations support the creative sector. I know, for example, MTN, the telecom network, supports creativity in Nigeria, supports people that work in the creative and arts and culture sector. So you have a lot of organizations that do that. If I look at also, I'm in Nigeria, so I reference Nigeria a lot. Access Bank is another group that actually has huge investments into the creative sector, supporting a lot of arts and culture work. So that happens as part of their corporate social responsibility. So it's also a good way to get funds. And then you have international development agencies. You have the USAIDs, you have the British Councils, the DFIDs, all the different developmental agencies, Goethe Institute, all of them, support the creative sector very well. So it's always good to find out what they're supporting and align it with your work so you can be able to ask them for that support. Next slide, please. Okay. So another way that you can be able to find funding is to look at people that you can partner with, or people that can be your competition. Who are those groups that are doing similar things that you're doing? If you're a journalist that is funding an online blog, who would you consider as your competitors, and research them and look at who is funding them? That way, you can be able to now know that they fund things similar to what you do, and it enables you to go after those funding. So check websites. Most organizations frequently list who is funding them on their websites. It's often a requirement for many funders that fund projects that they indicate who is funding the project. So do that research and check those websites. Create partnerships, especially if you're a small organization, if you're a grassroots media organization, or you are an individual. It's a lot harder for you to get access to funds because you don't have a track record. So it's always good to create partnerships. Partnership allows you to be able to bring your ideas and then have people that already have a track record that can support you and work with you on those ideas. So it allows you to access funding that you might not be able to get on your own. It also allows you to gain experience on seeking for funding and project. I think someone just asked about the slides. Yes, we are going to share the slides to everybody after the session. So please don't worry too much about taking notes. The slides will come to each and every one of you after the session. I just saw that pop up in one of the chats. Partnerships can also make projects more complicated because when you are working as a partner, obviously you are now bringing two organizations together, and sometimes they do not agree. I've had a lot of experiences in Ford Foundation where we funded two organizations that, all of a sudden they fell out because one did not agree with the other. So in those partnerships, even though they are good, you also have to realize that there are going to be some challenges that might arise. So the more you know about this, the more you can be able to deal with it. Next slide, please. Okay, so I have these things I call keep in mind. Keep in mind are basically like key nuggets I want you to walk away with as we do this. So this one says that funders prefer to fund organizations they are familiar with, as well as those that have an established record of success. If you have not won many grants, try partnerships. This is very, very important because one of the questions we always get is, if I'm a new organization, I do not have a track record, how am I supposed to start? How do you get going? Partnerships are a good way to us to do that, but there are also other things that you can be able to do. One of the things you do as a new organization that is trying to establish yourself is to volunteer. And I've actually seen this work very well. Most funders fund organizations that are in the not-for-profit sector. Let's give you a good example. In Ford Foundation, we formed groups working on things like youth sexuality and reproductive rights and health. And these are all small NGOs. Most of them will need a creative that can do a website for them, that can create logos for them. So if you volunteer for this kind of organizations that are already being funded by the Ford Foundation, it enables us to know who you are and what you do, and then it makes it easier for you to come on board. And this is how many organizations do get new people in. So volunteering, finding partnerships will always help you to become known, because becoming known is a strong way to be able to get funding. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's go into looking at the proposal writing process. I want to make sure that I'm keeping to time here because I said I'll do this in about 45 minutes. So there are really 4 stages in your proposal writing process. You have your planning stage, then your research stage, the actual writing, and then the follow-up that comes after you've done everything. So we'll go through each of these individually. So first is your planning stage. First, next slide, please. The planning stage is really when you start thinking about what am I going to write my grant proposal about. When you are doing a grant proposal, you are much more likely to be successful if you are addressing a need that has been unmet. If you find a unique idea that you will seek for support to do, then you are much more likely to be successful in your grant seeking venture. So document an unmet need that the grant seeker is in a position to address. Part of that is to make sure that what you're documenting is something that the grant seeker is aligned with. Again, if you look at ANF, go to the website, you will find out what ANF wants to support. So look at those and try to find something within those criteria that ANF is supporting that has not really been addressed that much. Bring a unique idea. Once you bring that unique idea, it will raise the interest of the person that is reviewing your grant proposal. Develop a clear plan for the program. One of the biggest mistakes that many grant seeking organizations do is that they have good ideas of what they want to work on, but they don't know how to communicate what they can do. That's very important. You need to really make sure that you have your idea, then you create a very clear plan from point A to point B. If you're doing a film, you're going to write a script, you're going to do this, you're going to do different things. So articulate everything very clearly in your proposal. Research funders thoroughly. Make sure, again, that you're not wasting your time submitting grant applications to funders that it doesn't align with. So spend your time researching the funders and what they support. Even research what kind of support they give. If you have a funder that can only give $10,000 grants and you're asking them for $100,000 grant, then that doesn't work. So part of what you do in your research and your due diligence is to find out what those funders can support. The next one is very important. You need to build strong relationships with funders. Funding is really about relationships, whether we like it or not, because most people that work as program officers and that review your proposals, they get so many proposals every given time. Whenever you do a call out as an organization, you can get up to 1,000 proposals for a simple call out. So how do you now begin reviewing all of that? When you are a program officer, you review it based on strong relationships that you have with those people. And these are not people you know personally. Don't misinterpret that as being personally known to the funder. No, it's basically about, okay, if I go to a workshop, if I go to a conference, have I met people in those conferences? So as a creative professional, you need to be involved in networking that enables you to have access to meet funders. Look at where are those possible opportunities for you to meet funders and be a part of it. I talked a little bit about volunteering your time for other organizations. That's also a good way to build relationships, because let's assume that you volunteered your time for an organization working on sexual violence that is being supported by a foundation. And then all of a sudden, there's an opportunity for you to ask for a grant from that foundation. The person that you volunteer with can now become an ally and facilitate that relationship that will make the funder look at your proposal. So it's always good to build strong relationship with funders, because that will make life a little bit easier for you. Target carefully and write a concise proposal. Target carefully means that you need to know exactly what you are asking for and who you are asking for it, and then write a very concise and straight to the point proposal. Next slide, please. Okay, so next you have your research. Again, I've said this earlier on, find the right fit. It's important to find the right fit for who you're going to send your proposals. Many proposals focus on what is the need for the organization writing it, not what is the need for the funder. This is a very important point here, because remember, the funder is not giving you money because they like you. They're giving you money because they want you to accomplish something that fits into what they want to accomplish. So again, as you write your proposal, don't write about what you are going to get from the project. Write about what the funder is going to get from the project, because that is what is going to interest the funder enough to make that investment in you. A grant proposal should be a win-win proposition. A win-win for you, and win for the funder. Because again, yeah, a win for the funder, because that funding group, they want to meet their objectives and their goals. But also a win for you, because you need to make sure that you're doing something that you are investing your time into. So you want to walk away being satisfied with the investments you made in the grant. And don't get me wrong, as a creative, you invest your energy, you invest your intellectual property, you invest your thought in doing projects for these funders. It's not a direct work for hire relationship, but it's quite similar to something like that. So you need to make sure that as you design your proposal and you design your project, it has to be a win-win proposition, and you communicate that to the grant making body too, about what you as the organization going to carry out the project will gain from that project. Not only financial gaining, but how it fits into what you're accomplishing in your space. Next, you find and follow the funder's guidelines. I've referenced that earlier on, so I won't spend too much time again. Make sure that, again, this aligns with what the guidelines are for the funder. Guidelines like how long should the proposal be? If I want a 3-page proposal and you give me 11 pages, I'm not going to read it, because again, that is out of the guidelines and it takes a lot of my time to go through 11 pages. So I won't even get to looking at the ideas that you're selling. So make sure that it fits into those guidelines that are established by the funder. Next slide, please. Okay, keep in mind, researching funders or prospect research is a very time-consuming process. A lot of your energy and a lot of your time will go into researching funders or researching who you will approach for a grant. To increase the efficiency of your research, consider using a donor database to research funders and grant opportunities. There are many databases out there that you can be able to go, even just going to the funders' websites, you will find databases. Most funders are required, or even if they're not required, they put on their websites who they have funded with a brief description of the projects. That is actually a gold mine for many people that are looking for grants. If you go in there, you can be able to research and say, this is what Luminate Group has funded, read the project ideas, and then that will help you in being able to shape your own. So as part of your research, research the funder, research who they are funding, and then that will help you to be able to narrow down to who will fit your own approach. Next slide, please. So next now we're going to the actual process after the research, writing the proposal. Let's look at the next slide. Writing the proposal. Okay, so what funders need to see in your proposal? What specific need or needs are you addressing? Again, we've referenced this earlier on. That is very, very important for you to put that in your proposal. What are those needs? If you are addressing needs that deal with education, that deal with building the creative sector, that deal with anything, make sure that you articulate that in your project, because again, remember that it is only when the funder understands and gets a picture and an image of what you are trying to accomplish that that funder can be able to engage you more to seek for more information. One of the things that we do at ANF is that a lot of times once people send in their initial proposals or concept notes, we'll look at it, and then if it's interesting enough because we've really understood what they're trying to do, we can reach out to them to have subsequent conversations where more details are going to be able to come out. So it's always important to have that in mind. Then number two, next slide, please. What are you as the person going to do the project trying to achieve? Like I said earlier, again, this has to be a win-win for both the funder and the person getting the grant. So as you tell them what they want to hear, you also tell them what are you as a person trying to achieve and how does that align with your vision and your mission? That is where that vision and mission comes in. So again, if you are someone that has been working on a particular sector for so long, it shows that you have a track record of work in that sector. It shows that you have been trying to achieve a lot in that space. The funder will be a lot more interested in making sure that they engage you to be able to do that project. So the next thing they want to see in your proposal is what you're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. How will you and the funder know you are successful in what you have done? That is very important. You need to build what are the outputs. Success is about outputs. It's always good to have a good idea, but how do we know that that idea has been accomplished? One of the, again, challenges we have as as I work with my colleagues in ANF and reviewing some grants is looking at, most of these grants actually come up without any identifiable output. If you don't have an output, then how do we know you're going to be successful? So if you are, someone that wants to do a podcast, for example, what is the output? How many podcasts will you have? And not only that, how are you going to disseminate those podcasts? That's also part of how we know it's successful. What platforms are you going to be able to use when that podcast is created? Because if a podcast is created and nobody listens to it, then our work has not been done. We've not been able to reach people. So how will you and the funder know that you're successful? Articulate that in your proposal. Next slide, please. I think next slide talks about why are you the best organization to do this? This is where you talk about your history of work in this area. This is where you give some examples of what you've done already. This is a space you're working on. You definitely expand a lot of the work that you've done in this space and prove to the funder that if they trust you with their resources, you'll be able to deliver on this. So again, it's difficult for people that are starting anew, but if you have invested your time in doing things, even if you are not paid for it, then you can put this in there as the proof as why you are the best organization to do this, because you have a passion for this work and you've already invested your resources and your time doing this. Next slide, please. Next slide is talking about sustainability. A lot of times, funders don't like to just fund projects that will come in and go. How will you sustain this project? If I'm supporting an art festival and I'm supporting it for the first year, How do I know that if I don't support it for the second year, it will not disappear? You need to indicate that in your proposal. What are your plans for sustainability? How do you use that first resource I'm giving you as a funder to make sure that you not only deliver on that particular project, but you build in a process that will enable the project to continue, even if I don't fund it? Funders don't support you in perpetuity. They might support you for a few years, but eventually the whole idea is that your idea and your thinking is good enough to be sustainable and can be carried on when the funder is no longer there to provide resources. So it's important to indicate that sustainability planning. Next, please. So now the proposal elements, you have, just run through this and let's go to the end and leave it there, and then I'll just talk through them individually. So go to the next one, and then it kind of builds up, and then one more, and then leave it there. Good. So sorry, please just go back one. Okay, so you have your executive summary, your proposal narrative, which will have your statement of need, your goals and objectives. I'm going to kind of focus on this slide, and then I'll skip a couple of slides. I'm looking at the time, and we're actually pressed for time. So I'm going to just focus on this slide here and just talk you guys through it, and then we'll skip a few other slides. So your executive summary is actually the first thing that many funders will read. It is where you capture your whole idea for your proposal in 1 or 2 pages. So many people advise you to actually write this last after you've written the proposal, because this will summarize everything that you've talked about in your proposal. So some people will say write it first, others say write it last. My own approach is to actually write it last, because by then I have already written out my proposal, and this enables me to be able to condense it. So again, remember that this is the first point of call that the grant reviewer will have with your idea as executive summary. So it's important for you to be very detailed in that. Then you have your proposal narrative, which will include your statement of need, which again, what are you working on? Why is it important for the funder to fund what you are asking for? That is your statement of need. Your goals and objectives is, again, what are those goals that you have for the project? What objectives do you want to have accomplished by the end that project is done? Then we have our project description, which explains what you are going to do and the methods you are going to do. This is where you now indicate exactly what activities are you going to carry out with the resources that the funder is giving you. Basically, you articulate all of this in a way that the funder will be able to understand it. And then you have your organization's information. This is where, again, you align your ability to deliver on the things you are already proposing. So, what have you done before? What kind of manpower do you have? What kind of resources do you have that will enable you to be able to do this? What is your scope of work, that fits into this? So these all fall into your proposal narrative. The narrative can normally fit in about 2 to 3 pages again, when you're looking at a full-blown proposal. If you're doing a concept note, your narrative will not be more than 1 page, because a concept note is really a condensed proposal. So it will not be more than 1 page. Then next is the budget. We'll look at the budget. Budget is very important, so I'm going to spend more time on the budget a little bit later on. And then you provide supporting materials. Supporting materials are really all of those things that enable the funder to know that you are a viable organization. Where is your registration documents? Are you legally registered to operate where you're supposed to operate? Do you have audited statement of accounts and audited reports and all the things that the funder needs to see? In the Ford Foundation, one of the things that they used to ask for is the list of your board members and their phone numbers and addresses. And again, part of why we do that is for due diligence, to make sure that the people that you bring in on board as board members for the organization, or any group that are your board of advisors, are people that are reputable enough to vouch for the organization. So those are all part of the supporting materials that you provide. You can also provide things like prior work that you have done in this space, just to again give the funder the idea that you can be able to do this work. With prior work, sometimes it is not good to submit it as part of your proposal because it can overwhelm, but have it ready so you can submit it at a later date. So now I want us to please, Nazia, help me just run through the slides. I will tell you when to stop, because I'm trying to condense time a little bit. So just go through the slides, go through, and when you get to budget, good, let's start with budget. Budget is very, very important because again, grant making is about asking for money. So let's be realistic. All these things we're doing is about you as a creative getting the resources that you need to be able to do your creative activity. So no matter how amazing your ideas and everything sound, if your budget doesn't align and the funder doesn't like what you present in your budget, they're not going to support you. There are two types of budget that we often ask for as grant-making organizations. We ask for an organizational budget, which is basically your annual operating budget as an organization. The idea behind that is that it enables the funder to be able to see, what kind of money runs through your organization or you as an individual. Because again, if, as I said earlier, if you are a group that is used to getting small grants, then how do I know that you can be able to manage a big grant? So yeah, that having access to that budget enables us to know exactly how much we can support you with. Then you have your program or project budget. This is that budget that is specific to the project that you are seeking for support from the organization. So if it's a film, this is your film budget. If it's a festival, this is your festival budget. Again, you need to prepare both of these and submit along with your grant proposal. Let's look at the next slide, please. Good. So when we look at your organizational budget, we want to understand what has your revenue been over the past years. Have you had a track record of increasing revenue or decreasing revenue? If you had, let's assume that in 2019, you had $100,000 as your operating budget, that's good. And then in 2020, it fell down to $35,000. We'd like to know why. We want you to be able to explain that. Maybe it's because of COVID. We need to know why the fluctuation in your revenue over a period of time. That's why many funders will actually like you to submit a three to 5 year audited statements if you're applying for a lot of big resources. That way we can again look at how your funding goes. Do you currently have any active grants as part of your budget? And if those active grants are there, we hope that we are not giving you money that will pay for what somebody's already paying for. That's why we always ask that question. Do you have an accurate history of your grant activities? So, do you have an accurate history of your budget, how you spent money? Do you do any other fundraising? How do you get other resources that you bring into your organization? Do you do crowdfunding? Are you just sitting there writing grants? Do you have your own personal investment in the project? If you are passionate about a film project, then you should, you might invest a little bit of your own resources, either cash or kind, and that communicates your passion. One of the things I did in Ford Foundation is people come to me for a TV series, and I'll tell them, go and look for money to do a pilot. And then when you get that pilot done, you come back to me and then we can talk. So by giving you that opportunity, you go out there and then you look for that support. If you get it, I know that you're very serious about this, and then you can come back and we can now look at how do we fund a whole quarter of this series. So it's always good to indicate whether you have any other kind of funding. Do you cultivate individual donors? Do you have others that are passionate about what you're doing? Individual donors can be, again, either cash or kind. If you're doing a film with a scriptwriter donating their time to write that script for you, or do you have to pay somebody? So, make sure that you articulate all that, because the more external resources you get into the project, even if it's not cash resources, the more likely you are to be supported by a grant maker. Do you receive in-kind donations? Are you a membership organization? If you are like a hub, a creative hub that has members that are part of it, how is that membership going to drive the project that you're trying to do compared to you standing alone? And then do you rely on volunteers? These are all the things that we'll look at when we're looking at your budget. Budget is not just about cash only. It's also about the in-kind things that you are bringing in as an organization. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, budget do's and don'ts. These are things that as you create your budget, you should always keep in mind that you do the following and you do not do the following. First of all, you understand that the budget is an important part of your grant application. So, treat it adequately, as is very important. You read the grant application for budget requirements. Many funders, when they put call outs, will indicate how much they can support. If they don't, you can send a message asking, what range should I put in my budget? It's always good to know that because you don't want to overshoot or undershoot. I've had instances where I had, $100,000 for a project, and then somebody comes to me asking for $20,000 because they did not ask. In those instances, if it's a project I really like, then I will engage them and find ways to get them to up their budget so they can meet what I have. Again, remember that, as grant makers, we have these resources we have to give away. So we make sure that we give it to projects that are aligned with what we're trying to do. And again, we don't want to give it to you in a punitive way. We give it to you in a way that you'll be actually happy to get the work done. Have put elements in the budget based on project needs. Do not pad your budget. That's something that, when you do your budget, make sure that all the things you put in that budget align with what the project needs. If the project doesn't need a car, why would you put a car in the budget? If a project, let's assume you're going from I'm going to use Nigeria again. You're going from Lagos to Ibadan to go and shoot a film. Lagos to Ibadan is about a 2-hour drive. Why are you adding a flight ticket for that when I know you can jump in your car and drive to Ibadan to go and do that? So put elements in the budget based on project needs, not based on your ability to try and get as much money as you want to, because again, people reviewing these grants understand this process. Provide budget justification, especially for standard objects or activities. If there are any budget line items that stand out to you, it will stand out to the funder. So always provide a justification. If I have to bring in a film colorist from the USA to come to Johannesburg to color my film, I need to justify that. I need to say, I'm doing this because I don't have an appropriate colorist in Johannesburg that can do justice to this film. So I'm going to fly someone from the US, put that justification there, especially again, when those budget items do stand out. Then itemize your budget. Give as much detail as possible to your budget. The things you don't do, don't overlook the importance of having a logical and rational budget. If your budget is irrational, I'm not even going to look at your project to tell you the truth, because it makes me worry about your motivation. So always make sure that you have a logical and rational budget. Do not include items that are not specifically requested in the grant application. Do not lump all your revenues and expenses together. Make sure you separate this for your organizational budget. Do not forget to review and check final document before submitting. And I've seen this so many times that people make calculation errors in their budget. If you're going to make such an error in doing your budget, then why will I trust that you're going to be careful in executing my project? So it's always good to make sure that you edit, to make sure that you recalculate as much as possible. Then, do not spend more on your organization than on the project. A red flag that many grant reviewers have is when you bring a budget for a project, and then I have 60% of the resources are going to paying staff salaries and 40% are going towards the project. That's a very big red flag. Part of a guideline that Ford Foundation has is what is called a 30-70. Not more than 30% of the budget for a project should go towards paying for staff. So you need to keep that in mind. Many organizations might have similar guidelines. If they do, make sure that you actually follow that through. So the 30-70 thing is a Ford Foundation thing. It could be different for other organizations. So just make sure that, again, when you do that, you articulate why. If that has to, I mean, every once in a while we have to deviate from that, but you need to justify why we need to deviate from that. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll talk about the supporting materials that you'll be submitting. These are all the necessary documents that will make your grant application stronger. I've talked about what some of these could be earlier on. Again, make sure that you find out what the funder wants and give them what they need. So normally they can indicate these are the things we need for you to submit to support the grant application you're doing. Give them what they need. Don't give them too much information. I think someone is asking a question here. What are guidelines for overhead? I guess, we'll come back to some of those questions. I just saw that pop up. Please make sure that you bring that question up for me again later on as we address Q&A. So let's look at the next slide, please. I am trying to hurry up and finish in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Next slide, please. Okay, sample supporting materials. We've already gone through some of this. So press mentions, for example, you can submit those. Reference or support letters from people you've done work before could be good supporting materials. So these are some of the things that you can have ready to submit. Next slide, please. Okay, so now finally, after you've done your proposal and you've submitted your proposal, one or two things happen. The funder either says yes or they'll say no. If they say yes, yeah, you're going to get the money you need to do the project. Some of the things you do is that you send a thank you letter. It's always nice if they say, yes, we're going to support you, send a thank you letter appreciating the opportunity that you are getting, because it is a very rare opportunity that you get. So in that thank you letter, again, you articulate your commitment to that project and being able to deliver on that project. Then keep the funder informed on the project. That is very important. So once you get the grant, the biggest mistake you make is to disappear. Give the funder regular updates on how the project is coming along. Be very responsive. If the funder sends you an email asking you for something, please, please, please do respond, because most of the time when we send those emails, it's information that we need to be able to do our own reports. So be responsive to the funder when they ask for information. Again, do what you said you are going to do. Again, this is very, very critical, because once you get that money and that money is in your account, you don't have the opportunity to start doing whatever you want to do, because the grant is almost a contract between you and the funding agency, and you need to stick with that contract. So don't start changing projects along the way, giving justifications why, because if you do that, we might let you get through with it the first time, but you're not going to get funding the second time. So it's always important to know that, once that contract is done, you must follow through. Then next is please, next column, please. Next column is looking at what you do when the answer is no. More often than not, you will get no than yes. That's actually the issue with this job. You are much more likely to get no's than you are to get yes. Always realize that it is not personal. The grant reviewer doesn't have anything against you. They are going through a lot of proposals and a lot of ideas. So it's always very difficult for them to be able to know exactly what they can be able to support. So it's not personal. Just, suck it up, go back and find out why they said no. A lot of times, many organizations will send you a form letter. We draft the letter that we send to everybody. And then, but sometimes you can, send a response back, say, thank you so much. I understand you cannot support me, but could you give me ideas of what I can do differently next time? Maybe not for you, but for another funder. When I get those kind of mails, I always respond to it. Because again, somebody has taken the time to put this together. So you get back to them and say, okay, this is why I did not fund you, and give them the reasons why. But also let them know that, it could have been an amazing project, but because of the limited resources that we have, we cannot fund every amazing idea that we get. So encourage them so they continue coming back. Ask about future funding opportunities or references. Ask in the feedback that you get, can I reapply next year or when you open a call again, or can you refer me to foundations that can support this kind of work? Again, most of the time you will get a feedback where somebody refers you to someone, and then move on and seek other prospects. That's, part of life is disappointment. So move on and continue with your head held high. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to briefly talk about resources. Again, these are, you conduct your web-based research to find funding, subscribe to a donor database, research other organizations to find out who funds them, start with what you know and dig deeper. That is something I always say, you start with the ideas that you have. So have your idea about what you're trying to do. Then when you want to do your search on that, dig deeper. If you're a filmmaker, don't go and start doing a search for people supporting folks in the creative sector. No, that's too wide. Look for people supporting films. If you're a documentary filmmaker, do a search on documentary film support. That's what it means by start with what you know and dig deeper. Because if you go online and start doing a Google search for people supporting creatives in Africa, you will come down with 1,000,001 websites that you cannot go through. But when you go and say people supporting documentary films in Nigeria, then it will narrow it down for you to be able to know exactly who to reach out to. Then network and belong to many affinity groups. Networking is highly important for creatives. So, do not work in isolation. Find groups that you can be able to join in your community. Join the ANF affinity group. Be part of, groups that you can be getting updates on different things that are going on. Next slide, please. Okay, so I have just again, we're going to share these slides. So these are some private philanthropic foundations that I know of that are supporting work in the creative sector. Most of these groups are actually part of the ANF, funding group. But groups like the Bertha Foundation, Bertha is a group that funds a lot of documentary films in the continent. MacArthur Foundation is also quite similar. Again, these are the big private philanthropic foundations, and I've created links to their website in this document. So once you get the slides, you can be able to click to go to their website to see. Again, there are a lot more than these ones that I have here. This is just a very few of them. Next slide, please. And then you have your international development agencies, USAID, UKAID, DFID. Again, these are all popularly known groups. There is one thing I found out is that for the US embassies across the world, I don't know if this happens to other embassies, but the ambassador in each of the embassies has what is called an ambassador's fund. And it's really a bucket of funds that can be used to support small projects. In Nigeria, they actually support a lot of creative activity with that. They support short films, they support artists. So again, investigate in your country if there is such a fund available for. I know of the US Ambassadors Fund. I don't know if other countries do it. So it's something that could be interesting for you to look at. UN agencies like UNICEF, UNESCO also do support work around storytelling and the work that they do. So again, they are good organizations to look into. Next slide, please. You also have what we call special funding initiatives. And these are initiatives that are set up by donors to disburse funds. So I have number one, their group like Africa No Filter, which we all know about, is set up by donors as a way to disburse funds to creatives. So they become an intermediary. It's a non-for-profit group. These are all non-for-profit groups, but they become an intermediary. You have DocuBox is in Kenya. DocuBox is, again, they support documentaries, and again, they get resources from the big foundations and they give to smaller creatives. You have Impact Fund for Creatives. Is actually a very interesting new idea that is supposed to start this year. I think I do have a link to their website, so please look at that. It's not a direct grant, it's an impact investment for media and for creatives. So the whole idea is that they're going to be investing $100 million on African creatives on loans that will come back with a very minimal return. I think it's like a 1% return. The group is going to be based in Accra, Ghana. So please look at their website, read up on what they do. It's a very interesting approach to funding for the creative sector. Then you have Africa Women's Development Fund. It's again another group in Accra that supports storytelling around issues concerning women. They have a media fund there. You have the Africa Trust Fund. You have the Africa Culture Fund. Again, there are many organizations that are similar to this that are just special funding initiatives that have been created to disburse donor funds in much smaller buckets to creatives. And the next slide, please. And then finally, I found this amazing resource. It's a website called peakproposals.com. I don't know how many of you know of it. It's actually a US-based website, but they have an amazing database of how you can find funding. Unfortunately, some of it you have to pay for, but they've created these little books called 100 funders for projects based in individual countries. So for Africa, I believe they have these three here: Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria. They have Ghana, they have Tanzania. I believe they have Cameroon, and they keep creating it. So what they do is that they list 100 funders in each of these countries, and also those that are outside of a country supporting work in those countries, and then they list what areas they support. This is not a strictly media-specific resource, but it's a good way to look at who is supporting what, and then you can be able to see if there are any alignments with what you do. If you're creative and someone is supporting work around women's rights, then you can approach them to do a documentary about women's rights. So that's kind of why I brought this. It's an amazing, it's actually an amazing resource. For the individual books, the 100 funders is about $10 to $12 for each country. So you have to pay for it. But they also have a lot of free resource on the website. It's called peakproposals.com. I encourage you to check it out. And they also have a lot of online courses on grant writing too that you can be able to take. So these are some resources I just wanted to share with you guys. And I believe this is my last slide. I know I have gone over the time that I planned to go over. So I believe we will stop here for now. And Anthony Wafula will be coming on to talk about reviewers' point of view, what reviewers are looking at.
Thank you, Paul, for that brilliant presentation. And it speaks to what I want to share with us this afternoon and morning to some people. My name is Anthony Wafula. I work as a business development manager at Heroes Foundation, and I cover Eastern and Southern African region. So this afternoon, I just want us to have a look at what does it take. What is it that a reviewer is looking for in your proposal? And I'm going just to spend at least 10 minutes or even less going through what Paul might have spoken to you about, but also emphasizing on a few things that I think are quite important for you to know. First thing for us to consider is that remember, when you're putting together your proposal, if you're a creative, you're trying to do what we call auditioning. You're trying to win something. It's much more of a courtship game. So don't you ever forget that. But something else that I do remember that this particular reviewer, put yourself in his or her shoes. As Paul has indicated, the reviewer is just a program officer or a program assistant in a given organization. He or she has got other different duties, and chances are he or she is reviewing hundreds and hundreds of proposals. So then the question is, how does your proposal attract him or her? And also remember that at times, this reviewer is not a subject matter specialist. At times, we bring in teams to help us move things very fast, and we're just looking for the very basic information. And at times, the reviewer might be a team of people with totally different backgrounds from whatever is being asked for. There might only probably be one person who understands that specific area. So all these dynamics come into play when you're trying to review proposals or even trying to review the concept notes. And this is something that you really need to be aware about. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the reviewer. What is it that they might be looking for? But most importantly, how do you make sure that your proposal catches their eye? Then proposal review in some places broadly goes through two different processes. The very first process is what we call the administrative review. So you've been responding to proposals, you've written your proposal. Before you click send, there are certain things you need to be very, very careful about and check again. One, in every call of proposal, we normally ask you that this proposal must reach us by either 5 p.m., by midnight, by close of business, specific time. Are you going to beat the deadline, or are you going to wait until the last minute and then start sending your things? Secondly, have you checked on the requirements and make sure that you met the minimum requirements in every call? When we say that we really want some attachments on there, we really want some information in there, we really need some budget clearly articulated, as Paul had pointed out, are all these minimum requirements and attachments available? Are they in the prescribed formats? Some reviewers will tell you, please just send us PDF forms. Some will tell you that your budget needs to be in Excel, but for some reason, some of us send our budgets in PDF forms. And if you don't follow these guidelines, at that very first administrative review stage, believe you me that your proposal might be kicked out simply because you did not follow the guidelines, you did not meet the minimum requirements. But also do remember that in some instances, the administrative review is done or even is automated. This means that there is a machine or there is a system in place that just checks your proposal has come in, runs through it. Do we have this, and that? Yes. Proceed to the next stage. If that is not there, at times stop. That is disqualified, not because your proposal is bad, but simply that's how the machine is programmed, or that's how the system is programmed. So bear in mind that the first administrative review can be done by a human being, or it can be automated. So the very minimum that you can do is to make sure that first you meet the very minimum requirements. Submit on time. Don't you wait for the very, very last minute. And please just check and ensure that everything we are asking you to submit is available in the prescribed format. That gives you a higher chance of making it to the second round of review, which I'm just going to speak about now. And now this is what we call the technical review. Now, technical review, as I said, is for those that have really made it past the administrative review. It means that we know your budget. It means that your proposal and all stuff that we did ask for you are available and they make sense to us. And then we sit back and start asking ourselves, okay, how have you articulated your ideas? Okay, do we have clarity of purpose? Remember, you're a creative, you're an artist. Are you telling me a story about what you want to do, what you want to achieve? Are you aligned to what my organization is looking for? As Paul said, is it a win-win situation? So we look at how we've articulated these ideas. And in most cases, most of us creatives fail at this point because at times we want to force issues that you're not aware of, issues that you do not know, but it's just a mishmash of ideas. The objective does not relate to the impact, to the outcome, and then you find that things are so mixed up. The coherence is not there. So remember, the first thing we're looking for is your proposal or concept not coherent? Does it make sense? Does it tell me a story? Does it paint a picture to me? Then the second thing that I'll be looking at, very broadly speaking, is viability. Is your concept or proposal practical? Is it something that we can do in 6 months, in 12 months, in 2 years, in the specific region that you really want to implement in? Or are you just being creative and actually giving me ideas that are practically cannot work? So we look at viability. So step back and ask yourself, if I got this money within this project duration, is this project feasible? Can I deliver? So viability is quite critical, and at times most of us don't check on that. We're just happy to apply because there are funds there. Then thirdly, and this Paul has already pointed out, we're looking at impact. What change will the projects bring about? What value are you bringing? What difference is your project going to make? And I normally ask applicants, be very modest. You're not going to change the world in 6 months. You're not even going to change the world in 12 months. But you can touch a life. You can change how things are done. You can contribute to something. So it is how you phrase that and be realistic in terms of what you're going to do. So this is what we call, and this is what Paul pointed out, that it's mostly about what is my return on investment? Why should I invest in your project? Why should it move forward? How is it going to advance what I really want to do in terms of achieving my mission? So again, consider about the impact. Be very careful how you phrase that, but be very modest in terms of what you can do. Take note of the budget you're proposing, take note of the project duration, and then you shall look at it later on and say, what capacity do you have to deliver? Then the other thing we look out for is value for money. At times, we get very flowery proposals and ideas, but we keep asking, what value is it adding to what's already going on? Remember, some of these ideas are not going to be working in isolation. You could be contributing to something. Can we see this connection? At times, we simply just want money probably to finish a production. You might have done some other things. And then you come to me and say, I need $2,000 to finish ABCD. That makes sense. Instead of asking me for $50,000 to do things that other people are also funding. So think about that aspect of value for money. It's quite critical. I need to see that this investment is going to do the intended thing, and we are going to see good results coming out of that. Then Paul has also spoken about innovation. And when we speak about innovation, we're not just asking you to think of wild ideas. Innovation is just about how you're going to do things differently. What freshness are you bringing on board? What uniqueness does your proposal present? Okay, and this, as I said, could be just in terms of approach. It could be in terms of ideas. So it's not something out of this world. When you speak about innovation, I'm mostly interested in the approaches, in the systems you're going to put in place. But I'm also looking at, have you really thought through this thing and saying that out of 100 proposals, all recommending to do something the same, I'm probably going to be one person who's going to do it differently, spend the least amount of time, be more effective, but deliver, okay? Every other funder wants to use the least to attain more. If you can show me how you can do that, then I think we're going to be speaking a similar language. Then as Paul has also pointed out, we look at capacity. Do you have the technical and institutional capacity to do what you're proposing to do? At times, and I've seen some questions, we come out at times as very flexible organizations, and I understand as creatives, at times you're working alone, you don't have an accountant, at times you're just good at producing content. But today, funders need to be clear that I'm not going just to throw my money at your problem. I need to be assured that somebody is going to have a look at it, somebody is going to follow through, somebody is going to develop those reports, somebody is going to develop your financial reports and be accountable. So we spend quite some time to have a look at how are you structured, as Paul had pointed out. But capacity, if you pass through the technical review, we might also come on the ground just to check and to see, do you really exist? Were those things that you're telling us exist? or are you just being imaginative? And believe me, we've gone on the ground and found people that are very good, written very nice proposal. You go on the ground, they don't exist. And these are some of the realities that we go through. So think through your capacity. Just try to imagine, for me to deliver these projects to the optimum, what must I have in place? How do I convince this funder that I can take care of his or her funds? How do I convince this funder that I can be compliant? And again, be modest. If you don't have certain things, just say that at the moment I don't have this, but with these funds, I intend to build my capacity in this way and this way. And funders are sympathetic to that. So don't pretend you have everything when you don't have. Be very honest upfront and say that this is what I do not have, but I'm looking forward to improving on it and working with you. And again, we do capacity institutional assessments. We share with you that report because then that tells us what gaps do exist. And once that is done, we work together to address those gaps so that our implementations becomes quite easy. So finally, as you think about submitting your proposal, ask yourself these questions again and think through them. What change does your project want to deliver? That should be the first thing. Why do you want to do this project? It's not just about the money that you want to get. Think about the people that you want to impact. Think about your society. Think about the difference. That's what you're looking for, okay? The money will come, yes, but if you're not very clear about the impact and the change that you want to see, then chances are you are going to miss out. Secondly, is your project aligned to your funder's mission? I think Paul has already explained on this. I'm not going to emphasize on that, but just step back and reflect. Do I know what the funder wants? Do I know why they started this project? Am I aligned? And at times, just ask before you send. Thirdly, does your proposal offer value for money? I don't want to repeat what I've said. Do you have the technical capacity to deliver? Have you complied with all requirements? And have you convinced yourself that there is potential for impact? There is potential for transformation, no matter how modest it is. So once you step back and answer these questions, you stand a higher chance of making it to the second round or the third round when then we ask you to come and have discussions so that then we can start processing your grants. I think I'll stop at that point and then happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony. Thank you for that. I think before we go to questions, we go to Jessica to talk about ANF grant making. So Jessica, over to you.
Great, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Anthony. I think we've had quite a few PowerPoints, so I'm actually just going to speak. My name is Jessica Hagan, and I'm Africa No Filters Program Lead with focus on arts and culture. And I guess you've had some fantastic advice and guidelines and insight into grant writing. And I know the question looming on most people's brains at the minute is, well, where can I find the funding? How can I access it? What does Africa No Filter do? And of course, I'm here to tell you about what Africa No Filter does and our grant making. And of course, Anthony and Paul have both provided fantastic resources outside of Africa No Filter that you can look into as well. So we support the development of contemporary nuanced stories that shift stereotypical and harmful narratives about and within Africa. We are a Pan-African organization. The team is spread out across the continent, and we are really focused, in terms of our grant making, we are really focused on supporting organizations and individuals within the arts and culture space and the media space as well. I would encourage everyone to take a look at the Africa No Filter website for more information, but I will quickly run through some of the grants that we award and the grants that we have available. So the first one is our operational support grants, and we award these to organizations within the arts, culture, and media sectors. One thing that Anthony mentioned is that it's really, really important to understand the mission of the organization who is grant making and giving out grants. It's extremely important to know why you want a grant from that organization specifically, and also whether your aims and your missions and your values align with the aims, missions, and values of the organization who is awarding grants to individuals and organizations. So for Africa No Filter and our operational support grants, they are for organizations who are in the storytelling and narrative change space. So that an operational support grant is used to support your program delivery, your organizational needs, your capacity building needs, and your training needs and your networking opportunities. And they are primarily, in fact, they're entirely for organizations, creative hubs, media houses, festivals, galleries, or digital platforms. So of course, with operational grants, we usually cap our grants at $25,000, and that allows us to support more organizations on the continent. Another thing Paul mentioned is due diligence. So with all our operational grants, and just for those who are interested, it's really important to ensure that you have been running as an organization and you have the financial statements and the audits to prove that you have been running as an organization, but actually you have the work and the projects and the outputs for us as grant makers to see what you have been doing. The next type of grant that we support, that we give out, is our project support grant. So that supports the delivery of creative projects on the continent by storytellers who are using art, innovation, tech, creativity, and also those in the media space to challenge or change or present new and contemporary stereotypes or narratives about Africa. So our project support grants are for specific projects that have a clear start and end date and a clear project milestone. Our project support grants go to individual storytellers as well as arts, culture, and media organizations. And we tend to give around 15 to 20,000 for our project support grants. I would actually say 10 to 20,000 for our project support grants. Lastly, we recently launched the Kekere Storytellers Fund. And the Kekere Storytellers Fund, for those who are in Nigeria, and especially those who speak Yoruba, means small. And they're small grants for emerging artists on the continent. And the grant is to ensure that we are truly reaching out and supporting narrative change makers on the ground and not just well-established storytellers. So I'm sure a lot of you have experience with being storytellers on the continent, and you're looking for a grant, and you maybe haven't been running for 5 or 6 years, or you haven't established or formalized your organization yet, but you still have ideas, you have evidence of your work, you're still emerging, you have content that you want to create that aligns with Africa No Filter's missions, and the Kekere Storytellers Fund would probably be the most suitable for you. So that fund is specifically for exceptional emerging artists, individuals doing groundbreaking work and who are creatively challenging harmful narratives within their local and digital communities. And so examples could be, maybe you're doing a dance project about ballet on the continent or in your specific country, and you want to dispel the narrative that ballet is elitist or European, and you want to present that actually this is an art form that is celebrated and practiced and executed beautifully on the continent. Lastly, our media grants, which are led by Natasha Kimani, who is based in Kenya. So our media grants support new organizations, platforms, and individuals that are disrupting stereotypical narratives. So we have grants for individual journalists, bloggers, vloggers, authors, writers, as well as TV stations, media houses, magazines, and publications. Once again, I would encourage you to go on the Africa No Filter website to learn more about the type of grants that we offer. Earlier, I was speaking about Africa No Filter as an organization and what we do. So when it comes to our narrative change work and our grant awarding, of course, we don't just award grants because we like your projects or because we like art or we like creativity. We have a vision and we have a mission. And it's extremely important that with every grant we award, it aligns with our vision and our mission. So for me, as somebody who is looking at arts and culture grants and awarding them with the rest of the Africa No Filter team, we don't just award grants because we see a fantastic project. We award grants because the person or the organization who has applied is very clear about the outcomes and the impact of the project or the organization that they are running. And it's extremely important in your grant application that you know that, and that grant makers or reviewers, as Anthony was saying, are not struggling to completely understand what you're trying to achieve. I think it's important to recognize that you will always be excited about your idea because you created it, and you will know the ins and outs of your work because you created it. But you have to be able to communicate that to people who may have never encountered your work or your organization before. Now, I know there are going to be questions about Africa's no filters process and how, in terms of how we grant make. So many of you who have been part of our narrative change community will know that we put call outs for creatives, for media persons, for all of the relevant potential grantees on our platforms and on our social media, through our newsletter, and on our website as well. I would encourage all of you to sign up to the Africa No Filter newsletter, because that is where we first put our grant announcements out. So if you want to get there first, definitely join our newsletter. We put an open call out for applications, and we review all of our applications against a scoring criteria. Those who pass the scoring criteria or meet a particular number are then reviewed by the Africa No Filter team collectively, where we discuss your idea, we ask the necessary questions, we take a look at your website, we take a look at the work that you do. Myself or Natasha will have a further conversation with the grantee, and that is really to understand what you're trying to do, what you have been doing, and what you would do if Africa No Filter were to award you a grant. And then I'm going to speak about the final stage once you have been awarded a grant and that decision has been made internally, which is really important to know. So as potential grantees, you are eager to get your foot in the door. You're eager to have conversations with organizations such as Africa No Filter. What you cannot do and you should not do, and I think Paul touched on this, is puff up aspects of your application, whether that's inflating your numbers, inflating your previous experience, or adding funders who potentially you may have collaborated with or had some type of sponsorship from, but weren't actually funders. Because once you are approved for a grant from Africa No Filter, a project support grant, an operational support grant, a media grant, or a KEKERE grant, you do go through a due diligence process. And that due diligence process requires, you know, except for the KEKERE grants, it requires auditing, it requires due diligence. We have further discussions, and once again, we're able to reach out to our networks. Africa No Filter has we have donor funders who, you know, are based across the world, and we have those conversations. And so what you don't want is to get through our grant making process, and when it comes to your due diligence, not having the necessary forms, auditing statements, or proof of work, or you haven't thought about your impacts, your outcomes, you haven't thought about your project milestones, which we check in with to measure against, to make sure that the grant is being used for the right purposes. So I'm just going to wrap up, but what I would say is I encourage you that when you're applying for grants to Africa No Filter, please do not just think about the beginning process, which is presenting a really great, fun, contemporary and innovative idea. Think about the entire grant making process to ensure that you are suitable and you are not stopped at any hurdle. Lastly, I would just like to say that at Africa No Filter, we are, you know, a young, fresh, new, dynamic organization, and we really rely on feedback from you as grantees, from people in the creative sectors, for people on the continent, to let us know your needs when it comes to grant making. And we will be, you know, hosting focus groups and having further conversations so that the grants we develop from here on out speak to the need of storytellers and narrative change makers on the continent. Research is extremely important for us, and essentially we don't create grants without doing the research first to ensure that the grants are useful, they're helpful, but actually they're relevant to our community and the people that we want to support. And I just see something in the comments about our grants. Our grant funding season is closed for the time being, because I can see that there's some confusion in the chat. We aim to open our funding season again in the end of May, beginning of June, so in the summer of this year. The best way to know when our funding season is back open is once again to register to our newsletter, where you will know about a week in advance of those who find out through our social media, but follow our social media as well. That's it from me, and I think Nazia will take us through for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much, all. I've been seeing quite a few questions on the Q&A. Please, we have about 25 minutes left in the session, so feel free to add more questions as we go through the questions. I'm going to, kind of flip through it, and then I'll call on somebody to answer. I think one here that I saw that is quite interesting, and I will answer it briefly, and also ask Anthony to chip in. There's a question by Sim, who says, when you are looking at grant proposal, do you base your decisions on the seeker social media presence? For example, will your decision be based on how many followers the seeker might have on Instagram, etc.? If yes, does this not then place the seeker at a disadvantage due to a shortfall of followers? I would say that no, we don't look at the grant seeker social media presence, and I don't think any organization will do that. So if you don't have a strong social media presence, that's not going to influence how we decide on whether you get a grant or not. That said, though, if it's a grant that calls for content being disseminated, you need to articulate how you're going to disseminate that content. You need to be able to put, okay, if it's a grant that you need to reach 1 million people, how are you going to reach 1 million people? And in that instance, then, if you already have 1 million followers on Instagram, it does look good, but that's not the criteria that we're going to use to decide whether you get the grant or not. So it's just, the criteria is based on your ability to be able to deliver on the project and the organization's ability to be able to do the work. Anthony and Jessica, I don't know if you want to add any more to that question.
Yeah, mine is just to say that we go to social media at the very, very last stage, probably when we are doing our due diligence, because again, giving you a grant is about repetition and you want to see the risks as well. But if it is not part of the requirements, then we're not going to go there. But just as part of the final checks before we award the final grants, then maybe you might want to have a look to see what's going on there. But that might not in any way disadvantage you.
Yeah, I'd like to add that I don't think social media disadvantages you. I think at many points it is an indication of the community and your outreach. And that's a lot of the reason why social media can be looked at. So what is the engagement like on your platform? If you're putting on digital events or, you're a digital organization, often your social media engagement is telling of how far your work reaches, which grant makers will want to look at often. So I don't think it means that if you don't have loads of followers, you won't get a grant, but it's something that can be considered, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Great, thanks. I have one here from Fred, which is very interesting. He says, I fail to understand how we build relationships with new funders, given the fact that some of them don't even answer emails. What is the best approach? That's definitely a good question to ask this group. As Anthony has indicated, a lot of program officers and a lot of people that review these grants have a lot of things they do. So it doesn't excuse them from not responding to emails, but you also have to understand that there are a lot of responsibilities that we are carrying on. So we might not be able to have a quick response mechanism to get emails back. But the fact is that most organizations have a requirement that says that, once you send an inquiry regarding a grant, we are required to respond to you. In the Ford Foundation, it used to be 6 weeks. That might seem a long time, but more often than not, it goes quicker than that. So other ways you can, again, be able to build relationships is to try to find where funders are and be part of those kind of sessions. I talked about volunteering. That's actually a very good way that I've seen this happen. When you look at organizations that are already being funded by those funders, find a way to create relationships with those organizations, and then they can enable you and get you access to the funders. Again, you need to look for ways to be creative. Social media has given us a wonderful opportunity. You follow people that are working for most of these foundations or funders, follow them on social media, and find a way to respond to some of what they tweet out, and find a way to make yourself stand out. I mean, it's not an easy process, don't get me wrong, but if persistence always pays in trying to build relationships and in trying to network, be part of affinity groups and network as aggressively as possible. Jessica or Anthony, anything to add?
Not from my end. Well covered, Paul.
Yeah, and I think LinkedIn is a good resource as well. And LinkedIn is good. It's a good way to network, but also avoid being too aggressive when it comes to reaching out to grant makers, or because if you imagine that 100 people are chasing one person, it can be quite overwhelming. So yeah.
Okay, that answered the next question, which was how frequently do you need to follow up with funders and how many times? Yes, you have to follow up within reason, but following up 10 times in 1 week is a little bit too much. So you need to make sure we draw a line between following up and stalking, and just do it within reason as much as possible. This one from Francis Odupute says, is there a limit of how many times an individual can receive grants from ANF? Some grant makers say if you have received funds from us once or twice for different projects in the past, you don't qualify to get grants from us again ever. Jessica, could you address that, please?
Yeah, I think ANF is, we are smaller than other grant makers such as Ford Foundation. And because of that, we want to reach out to as many people as possible and support as many people as possible. So you can continue to apply. But I think I would probably quite confidently say that, once you are awarded one grant, we probably would make sure we consider all other applications before awarding again.
Great, thank you. And again, most funders will not say that once you've received the grant, you're not going to come back again. A lot of funders actually do repeat funding, but again, there has to be equity. It's not just one group, occupying the space and collecting all the resources. So that's why, as much as possible, when you're giving a fund, a grant that goes for 1 year, use it for 1 year. At the end of that 1 year, if you deliver and you do very well, then you can come back and then we'll again review you along with everybody else. So there has to be equity built into the process of reviewing grants. Karabo, I was asking about, is it exclusively to nonprofits that we fund, or do companies also qualify? No, I don't believe it's exclusive to nonprofits. I think we do fund nonprofits and for-profits. However, the challenge is that most funders will ask for for-profit companies to segment grant funds. For example, if you're a for-profit group, we don't want you using grant funds to make a profit. So there could be a requirement that you actually run a separate account for the fund that comes from a granting organization. That's how we try to address some of those issues of not using the money to make profit. Okay, I'm quickly scrolling through here. Please, Anthony and Jessica, also, if you see any questions that you have in here in the Q&A that you want to address, please go ahead and do that.
I see a question in the chat from Phil about, do Africa No Filter find people or do we fund projects? I guess I would answer that, sorry. So we do a combination of both. Well, we fund projects and we fund organizations, but in terms of how we identify our grantees, we are always scoping the land and looking for new and exciting organizations and individuals, but we're also receiving applications as well.
I'm also seeing here one by Bruce, who's asking, what's the best approach to seek funding from organizations who do not even put out proposal calls? It's not easy to send a proposal to an organization with no target key in person. And I think that's why Paul was also saying that do your research, understand who's in that space. And then some organizations do not accept unsolicited proposals, so you need to be aware of that. And those who make calls will clearly communicate to that. But the essence of all this that just do your homework well, understand who they are and find ways of reaching them. There has to be a way of getting to them. I don't think most organizations are anonymous. What we know that some don't take unsolicited for proposals, but some will make a call.
Cool. There's a question here which says, do you have any key or top recommendations on what to focus on for monitoring and evaluation or reporting when submitting proposals?
Okay, I think I will address that a bit. I think obviously, as part of your proposal, you need to articulate, what it is you are trying to do, and then articulate how do we make sure that there is a process in place. You need to put a work plan. Work plan is really important for monitoring and evaluation, because that work plan enables us to know by the 3rd month, you have done XYZ. By the 6th month, you've done XYZ. So those are all the things that you have to build into your proposal as a way to encourage the reviewer to know that you have actually done what you're supposed to do. Regarding evaluation, obviously, each grant proposal must have objectives that you're trying to accomplish. And those objectives must be articulated very well. Most of the time, the objective must be SMART objectives. So they must be, things that we can be able to measure. So for example, if I'm funding a film and that film, you say, okay, I'm going to fund a 30-minute film that should reach XYZ. We need to be able to adequately articulate, the demography that film is trying to reach, how I'm going to be able to reach them. That way in evaluation, I can now go back to make sure that those benchmarks are made. So really, the more details you provide in your proposal, the easier it is for the reviewer to look at it and make sure that there are some built-in benchmarks there that can be used to evaluate the success of that project at the end of a project.
Thank you, Paul. There's another good question for, I think, both you and Anthony, which asks about, for artist grants, should the artist include 30% or a payment for themselves when they're submitting a budget, or is that a red flag?
It's not. Okay. Anthony, go ahead.
Remember, as Paul said, each proposal has a budget. And you've accounted for how you're going to maybe pay yourself. So when you're evaluating budgets, we look at all these things. And I know, broadly speaking, for institutions, we know for your operational cost, there is a percentage that you need not go beyond. But that is clearly stipulated in the terms and conditions as you apply. So it's not clearly said that 30% should not pay yourself, but it's how you articulate how you are going to take care of your costs. And does that make sense in the first instance, Paul?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we don't want artists to starve, so I think we should make that very clear. So you are investing your intellectual property, you're investing your time in this project, and you should be rewarded for that time. So you build in a reasonable stipend for yourself as the person leading the project. And the key word there is reasonable, because if you're now building where you're paying yourself a lot more than what is reasonable, that is where it raises it becomes suspicious. So there is nothing wrong with allocating resources that goes to you for your upkeep as you're working on a funded project. And I think that also takes me, there's another question I just saw here now that is actually very important. And this from Adiambo that says, does that mean if someone receives a grant, they cannot use it to produce a for sale work? As an artist, if I get a grant to create a documentary, should I not monetize it? You can definitely monetize work that is funded by a grant. Let's be realistic, if you do a documentary, it is your intellectual property that you've created. Most funders let you keep the IP on what you create because it's your idea. Now, what we ask is that we have what is called Creative Commons, which means that if you are monetizing it, which you have a right to, for those instances where it's being used for educational purposes, then it can be used for free for those educational purposes. So long as you're monetizing it, understand that if it's being used in schools, if it's being used for purposes that are not for profit purposes, definitely you can allow those systems to be used in those kind of places. But monetizing it is not something that we are against, and I don't think any funder will be against you monetizing an idea that you've brought, and we supported you to create that idea. And Anthony, again, let me know if I'm wrong in that based on your experience with EVOS.
You are very right, because you own that piece of intellectual work. So just be upfront that as I'm looking for this grant, this is going to be the product, and this is how this product is going to be used, so that we know from the word go that you are producing content that you're going to probably monetize. And then people know how to relate with you. It becomes bad when you don't declare upfront what's going to be the outcome of that content. And then some funders will feel that you are using their resources to generate a profit and you have not disclosed. So just be very upfront. This is going to be the final product, and this is how it's going to be used. And then have that discussion with your funder. And I'm sure you'll come to some agreement that benefits all of us.
Great. There's another question on here, I think for both you and Paul and Anthony, I think you'd be able to answer it well. From Michael, who asked, is it advisable to work with a grant writer or a funding organization? Is it advisable to work with them to submit grant applications, or do funders prefer to deal directly with the beneficiaries? So should they learn and do it themselves, or should they outsource it?
I mean, for me, I always prefer you work on your grant yourself, but I also realize that a lot of times there are other responsibilities that we have. So if you have to engage a grant writer, definitely you can, but make sure that you work with that grant writer and that the grant writer is reflecting your thinking. Because remember, you are the one that is going to execute the project. So even if a grant writer writes it, you need to make sure that the writing aligns with your ability to be able to deliver on that project. So when it's done by a grant writer, make sure you review it, make sure you give the writer information that is out there. So when you get, and if you get that the grant, you can be able to deliver on that project effectively.
Agreed, Paul.
Okay, I think Jessica, you can answer this one. It says, I'm not based on the continent. Does this preclude me from applying for grants to make uniquely African stories?
No. If your work is centered on the continent and involves Africans on the continent, if you're a diasporan, do feel free to get in contact with us. Essentially, we're looking for projects that help us meet our aims and our goals, and that does include Africans in the diaspora as well.
And I think the question from Chirop Chepto is actually very interesting. It says, do you think we'll ever get to a point where it will be Africans and or African organizations funding each other rather than us relying on Western donor funding? Yes, I believe that we're already there. I believe there are a lot of African private philanthropies that are supporting projects in Africa. I think the key challenge we have at this point is that most of these African philanthropies support what I call infrastructure philanthropy. If I look at the Dangotes, if I look at some of the wealthy Africans, they're supporting work in those areas like healthcare, education, but they are not supporting work in storytelling. I think eventually we are going to overcome that. I think groups like Africa No Filter are helping in that process, because even though the support comes from Western funders, the whole process is being run by African grant makers. Right from Moki all the way to everyone that works for ANF, these are Africans that are in Africa that believe in Africa. So yes, there's nothing wrong with taking Western funds and applying Africa flavor to it, which is what Africa No Filter is doing. I believe that's a good start. But eventually, as philanthropy develops in the continent, we'll get to a space where African funders are going to realize the importance of the creative sector and invest more money in it. It's already happening, but we want it to happen a lot more.
Great. I think time is running, but somebody is putting a question saying that they really enjoyed the masterclass and will Africa No Filter be doing more masterclasses? So that's for you, Paul.
That's for me. Well, we're definitely going to be looking at more master classes. We do have a survey that's been out for about a month now that we are hoping for people to fill out the survey. Go to our website and you can have a link to that survey to fill out and let us know what master class, what topics do you need for us to do these master classes on, because we want this to be in response to what is needed in the sector, because we just don't want to put up master classes. We want to put things that people will need to understand more about, because that we feel like that will help grow the sector. So please fill out that survey, let us know what areas you want us to focus on, and we'll definitely do that.
Great. And there was a question that was that I think both you and Anthony can answer. What is the difference between a business plan and a grant proposal? So what information may be required for one, but may not be required for the other?
Anthony, you want to take that?
Yeah, that's quite deep. A business plan simply shows us how you're going to execute your idea in terms of these are the resources I have, this is the duration that I have, and these are the operations I'm going to do. Okay, broadly speaking, that's what a business plan is all about. But a grant proposal, again, is just an idea of what you really want to do. You may not be as concrete as possible as in a business plan, because a business plan then shows the how. Okay, you go deep into it. I have this amount of resources. This is the ABCDs of delivery. But a proposal is a proposition to us, to the grant maker, that this is the idea that I have. If all goes well, this is what you're going to achieve. So you're not so sure of the outcome, but you're selling this idea so that this funder can see value in it and work with you to deliver. So for me, those are the distinctions that I'm making.
Yeah. And I think, proposals are project specific. So they address how you're going to work on a particular project. Business plans are larger and they talk about how you are going to run the organization. I think for me, that is also the key difference. I believe that our time is up. We have 3 minutes to go. And I want to just give Anthony and Jessica a minute each to just say their last words before we move on.
Well, mine is to thank you, all of you, for the questions, but do remember, it's about the idea that you have. All that a funder wants to do is to find the right ideas that meets his or her expectation. So be that person who thinks through that and just say that, let me speak to this funder so that we can collectively work to change what we are doing or to change our environment. Don't you forget, it's about the change that you want to see. It's not about the money.
Fantastic. I actually want to use this time to answer a question somebody asked. In fact, there have been quite a few questions about what type of organizations has Africa No Filter awarded a grant to. And we are just about to announce our first round of grantees. And so I would just encourage you to follow us on social media and get an idea about the type of ideas, people and organizations that we want to support. But also there are lots of opportunities out there, and to just not give up and keep applying, keep networking in this interesting digital age, keep connecting with people online, and yeah, things will hopefully work out.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you all for being part of this really exciting session. It's been very, very interactive. The questions have been flowing, and we really appreciate, you staying and sticking around for 2 hours. We hope you've gotten a lot from this. And I encourage you, ANF is here to support the African creative sector. We're doing something different. We're encouraging Africans to tell African stories. So we really want you to engage with us, be part of our network, and let us know how we can be able to support the sector, because that is what we're here to do. We're here to really do whatever we can to build capacity to make it possible for African stories to be told in different ways. And that is why we're doing all this. So please do keep us posted and do check out all of our social channels. And we look forward to seeing you again for a similar webinar. Thank you so much.